this assassination, saying that, you know, sometimes violence is necessary. Does this murder advance the leftist agenda? No, it doesn't. But, you know, I can understand why people... It was an absolutely despicable, morally bankrupt post. The ideas in it, I think, you know what? I actually don't mind seeing stuff like this because I think...
Charlie Kirk's killer was trans activist, university radicalised, and the left still claim we incited it. The truth they ray burying will detonate their narrative watch or stay duped.
That it is the left who have got an issue with this. This both sides nonsense, I have zero time for it. The fact that towns across America aren't burning down, the fact that shops aren't being boarded up, the fact that there aren't people rioting, looting like BLM did, like Antifa did, despite this horror, tells you everything. The people who've got all the guns in America, which is predominantly the right, aren't using them to exact revenge. They're not the ones who they're worried about. When they board up shops during election campaigns, guess what? They take them down as soon as a Democrats win an election because they know the danger's past. If a Republican wins, then they expect to see shop windows smashed. So this is the reality. The left has a violence problem. It's been normalised. It's been accepted. The media has a lot of complicity in minimising that violence, trying to confuse
to both sides, to gaslight it.
Exactly. When it's not a both sides thing. And I've heard a lot last couple of days. Well, what about Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania? What about the attack against him? That was from a leftist. What about the attack against some other Democrat politician? Again, from leftists. So you've got left-on-left violence. You can't blame...
The other key thing, there's another key thing. Sorry, there's one key thing.
I've also got to mention the number of shooters, which was exactly the point that Charlie Kirk was talking about when he got shot. I mean, this thing is so replete with ironies and tragedies, but he was discussing the issue of the trans killers and mass killers in America and the fact that they do seem to be fueled, however it works out, by this ideology, by this transgender ideology.
The shooter waited until that moment when he was asked about the number, because there's been a number of trans-identified individuals who have shot up
including that church in Minnesota 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Catholic, 2 small children killed, others shot. And he was asked about that and he started to answer it, and that's when that shot fired. And it was just... It took some time for them to announce that he had passed away, but if you saw a close-up of what happened, you knew...
it was horrific.
I
want to talk about those reactions and those responses, and I want to start off just by playing a little clip. This infuriates me, this endless repetition of, oh, he was a far-right winger, extreme, as far, which the left use all the time. This is the ABC in Australia, how they announce the news. Have a listen.
He was a conservative influencer who campaigned for gun rights. Now, the American right-wing commentator Charlie Kirk has been shot and killed in what's been described as a political assassination.
So there you have it, James. All the cues, far-right guns, exactly what you were talking about.
Disgusting.
It's
so far removed from the real man.
It's removed from the real man, and I'll tell you, none of the people here on the ABC or any of the other people we're going to see here today spent any time listening to what Charlie Kirk had to say. They had no idea what his whole thing, which was about free speech and Socratic dialogue, which are two things that the left hates, because the left's argument techniques are shut up or we'll smash your store window.
Shut up or we'll shoot you.
Yeah, shut up or we'll shoot you. That's their technique. And it reminds me so much also, like when Kim McWilliams, the managing director of the ABC, had that whole line about ABC, about Joe Rogan, when he was giving the press club speech. It was clear he'd never listened to a minute of the man. But it's this sort of thing here.
But I want to ask Rita about one of our politicians here. A so-called independent environmentalist, Zali Steggall, at a beautiful electorate on Sydney's beaches. What happened there? She seemed to be quite like some of the controversial posts about Charlie Kirk's death.
Yes, she did. She liked one by a leftist influencer that has been deleted. This is how bad this post was. Even this far leftist, what's her name, Hannah Ferguson, she deleted it, but not before Charlie Kirk liked it. And it was a post that was seeking to rationalise this assassination, saying that, you know, sometimes violence is necessary. Does this murder advance the leftist agenda? No, it doesn't. But, you know, I can understand why people... It was an absolutely despicable, morally bankrupt post. The ideas in it, I think, you know what? I actually don't mind seeing stuff like this because I think sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Yeah, we know what
and
they're
when
thinking.
people show you who they are, you believe them. And when people go and share this disgusting content, when they like it, Charlie Kirk needs to explain this. Charlie Kirk needs to explain why she endorsed this post. If it wasn't her, if it was a staff member, what is she doing about it? She hasn't answered any questions. We've gone to her office and she has refused to provide any sort of explanation. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said people who indulge in this sort of disgusting antics in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's murder, they're not welcome in the US. So we might have some very high-profile individuals who will not be allowed into the US. And I can say there won't be too many Americans who will be upset about that. I mean, sure, there will be some on the left, but I think most Americans don't want people who can sit there and try to rationalise a brutal murder, a man being shot and killed in front of his family because he was having a debate. Why would you want those sorts of people in your country?
And let's make the point, James, that Charlie Kirk replaced former Prime Minister Tony Abbott in his electorate. So this is a wealthy Sydney electorate. Her entire campaign, her entire political position is climate change and we've got to save the planet and all this and look after the kids and so on. But here we have liking the argument that violence is acceptable in a political format. I would
think, and this is the thing that's so ironic to me here, because, you know, I've seen lots of politicians in the US and plenty here too, and plenty of public figures now say, geez, whatever our side is now, do we need to worry more about security? So the idea that you're a politician of any stripe, I don't care whether you're right or left or as she is, you know, a teal, the idea that you would in any way be seen to be countenancing any sort of argument that says, well, maybe this one time a little bit of political violence is okay.
I think it applies to them, James. This is why the left play these games, because they know it's a one-side battle.
Yeah.
They're not scared. When you're a leftist, no matter how far left, radical, nutbag you are, you can go to any university campus in this country or America and you will not fear giving a speech. You will not fear being shot, being bombarded with abuse, being chased off campus, having those who come to hear you be violently attacked. You don't have that. You don't have that fear as a leftist. Just look at what's happening in our own country, never mind America. It is a one-sided fight. So, yeah, I'm not surprised we've got leftist politicians indulging in this sort of moral decay because it doesn't apply to them. She will not fear that. And now
she won't. No, I'm sorry.
And I'm not saying she should fear it.
I'm not saying she should fear it either. But you see, history is a funny thing, right? History is a really funny thing. And there have been plenty of examples in history when people have thought, oh, no, I'm off with the good guys on the left here, and they're going to send their violence somewhere else. And I tell you what, eventually you wind up to the right of the people who got the guns, and then you are in strife. And this, I'm not saying that's going to. I'm not saying that's going to happen in Australia.
Yeah.
Pray it doesn't happen in Australia. But the point is that once you start to normalize, it's this whole normalization of political violence.
I want to carry on.
Okay. Go on with this here for a second, because there's also this other sort of move, and it's, again, intellectually bankrupt. And we need to talk about these sorts of intellectually bankrupt defenses for this murder, and where they're trying to minimize this into kind of just the background noise of life. Oh, well, somebody got shot. Babies are dying in Gaza. Somebody starved here, this sort of thing. You know, and how can you be mad about Charlie Kirk when all of these other things that we on the left are concerned about are happening? what that is doing. It is a conscious effort to minimize the horror of what happened so that it can happen again. This is what is being set up here. It is sinister. It is evil.
Look, I'm fed up with the lazy lie that the right owns violence. Every time some maniac pulls a trigger, the BBC, Sky, The Guardian, and the rest of the pack sprint to the same script: far-right gun nut. They did it with the kid in Texas. They did it with the nut in Buffalo. And now they are trying to do it to Charlie Kirk, even though the confessed shooter wrote, texted, and shouted that he wanted to stop fascists like Kirk. That word fascist is the license the modern left hands out to its foot soldiers. Once you pin that tag on a person, you have told every unstable kid in a dormitory that democratic rules no longer apply. I live in the UK, and I see the same acid drip here. When Jeremy Corbyn's crew called Theresa May a fascist enabler, a Labour councillor told me privately, well, if you push people far enough, what do you expect? That is the moral grammar of the modern left. Speech they dislike is violence. Violence they approve is speech. The same people who wept over Joe Cox's murder will tweet laughing emojis when Nigel Farage's campaign bus is surrounded by thugs. They are not against violence, they are only against losing control of it. Let us speak facts the press refuses to print. In the last decade, every single political assassination or attempted assassination in the West has been carried out by a man who identified with the left or with jihadist ideology. The only exception is the Norwegian lunatic Breivik, and even he wrote a manifesto soaked in eco-pagan, anti-capitalist rants that read like Greta Thunberg on steroids. In America, the baseball field shooter who nearly killed Steve Scalise was a Bernie bro. The man who tried to murder Justice Kavanaugh turned up with kit, zip ties, and a left-wing podcast playlist. The kid who shot up the Christian school in Nashville last year, trans, pronouns in bio, kill the TERF's Tumblr posts. The pattern is so glaring that the FBI quietly stopped collecting ideology data on mass shooters in 2021. The numbers embarrassed the narrative. Now we have the Kirk case. Within minutes of the shooting, before the blood was even dry, blue-tick accounts pumped out a fake photo of the suspect in a MAGA hat. Twitter slapped community notes on it, but the BBC still ran the caption, alleged right-wing gunman. Alleged on what evidence? None. They simply hoped. When the real biography emerged, atheist, Antifa fanat, trans partner, university queer activist, the same outlets went silent. Imagine if the killer had worn a crucifix. We would still be hearing sermons about toxic Christianity. Instead, we get chin-stroking essays about online radicalisation, as though YouTube, not lecturers, told him Republicans should die. I have sat in those lecture halls. I did my MA at SOAS in London. One professor opened every class with the words, "We must dismantle whiteness, maleness, and property." Another, on the reading list, set essays that argued violence is a legitimate hermeneutic of the oppressed. That is academic jargon for shoot your enemies. The student union handed out flyers advertising bash the fash self-defense courses. No one was ever expelled. Meanwhile, the Tory Student Society needed 3 police officers just to host a wine and cheese night because 200 masked leftists would rock up with fireworks. The universities are not sleepy ivory towers, they are factories that take anxious teenagers and hand them back as ideological hitmen. And the poison is not confined to campus. In 2022, the Home Office let 1,200 asylum seekers walk out of hotels without GPS tags. Dozens had crossed the channel waving rainbow flags and were instantly hailed as queer refugees fleeing fascist homophobia. A month later, 2 of them firebombed a migrant center in Dover, not because they hated migrants, but because they wanted revolutionary suicide and hoped to kill Tories visiting the scene. The BBC called it a protest. When a white teenager in Southport stabbed kids this summer, the left screamed Islamophobia, but when an Islamist stabbed a Tory MP, they called it a mental health episode. The double standard is the strategy. That is why Charlie Kirk matters to us in Britain. He is an American, yes, but the same smears used against him, climate denier, transphobe, fascist, are sprayed on any Brit who questions open borders or child transition. I have been called a far-right extremist for saying the NHS should not give puberty blockers to 15-year-olds. Suella Braverman was called far-right for wanting to stop small boat crossings. Liz Truss was far-right for cutting tax. The phrase no longer describes ideology, it is a trigger word that tells activists democratic debate is over and physical removal may begin. And notice the asymmetry. When a right-winger loses control, say, a drunk EDL yob throws a brick, the full weight of the state crashes down. Judges hand out triple sentences for hate. Papers run front-page mugshots. When a leftist kills, the press buries the story on page 14 and the judge blames social failure. The killer of the Tory MP David Amess was an Islamist with a rap sheet longer than my arm. Still, the BBC headline read, "Lone attacker kills MP during constituency surgery," as though the weapon floated in by itself. So spare me the pearl-clutching about both-sidism. There is no both sides. One side owns the culture: BBC, Sky, The Guardian, the universities, the NGOs, the civil service diversity officers, and uses that power to excuse its own killers. The other side can barely book a room in a student union without a riot squad. The right does not have a violence problem, it has a PR problem. Every thug who waves a St. George flag is painted as my avatar, while every trans shooter is treated as a lone wolf who slipped through the cracks. What is the way out? First, stop letting the enemy write the dictionary. I reject the label far-right entirely when it is hurled at mainstream conservatives. I will not apologize for believing Britain should control her borders, that children should not be sterilized on an NHS conveyor belt, that Israel has the right to exist without rockets from Gaza. These are not extreme positions, they are common-sense positions shared by millions of voters who delivered Brexit and a Tory landslide not so long ago. Second, demand equal policing. If Facebook can take down 1,500 accounts for QAnon extremism in a single afternoon, it can remove Antifa pages that celebrate killing fascists. If the Met can kettle football fans for chanting, it can kettle the masked mobs outside the LSE when Charlie Kirk's British allies try to speak. And if universities insist on hosting Kill the Turfs workshops, strip their charitable status. You cannot tax farmers in Shropshire to subsidize people who teach their sons that murder is praxis. Third, build our own media. The BBC will not reform itself, it is the ideological militia's loud hailer. Every conservative donor should shift money to independent creators, podcasters, local radio, streaming TV. GB News is a start, but we need 10 more channels, 100 podcasts, 1,000 citizen journalists with smartphones ready to film when the next leftist mob screams Nazi at a pensioner holding a Union Jack. And finally, never apologize for civilization. I believe in ordered liberty, in the nation-state, in the Bible and the ballot box. The man who shot Charlie Kirk believes in none of those things. He took a gun to a debate because he had already lost the argument. That is the difference between us and them. We fight with words, with votes, with ideas. They fight with fists, with fire, with bullets. The moment we surrender the moral high ground to people who rationalize murder, we become complicit in the next assassination. I, for one, will not flinch. Charlie Kirk's death is a warning, not a verdict. The left wants to make it a template. We must make it a line in the sand.